Hello friends, and welcome back to the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature's podcast, Conversations with Mother Nature, a space in which we discuss the growing global movement that is the rights of nature. The Global Alliance, serving as the founder and secretariat for the International Rights of Nature Tribunal, has pioneered a groundbreaking platform for reframing and adjudicating environmental and social justice cases through a rights of nature-based earth jurisprudence. These tribunals serve as a beacon of hope, offering a framework for educating civil society and governments while exploring systemic alternatives to the failed negotiations of governing states. Today, we embark on a journey of dialogue and discovery, delving into the intertwined realms of the global tapestry of alternatives and the Rights of Nature Tribunals. Joining us for this illuminating conversation are Ashish Kothari and Francesco Martone. Ashish Kothari is an Indian environmentalist working on development, environment interface, biodiversity policy and alternatives. He is one of the founders of Kalpavriksh, a non-profit organisation in India which deals with environmental and development issues. In 2019, he co-created the Global Tapestry of Alternatives process. Francesco Martone is an Italian-Ecuadorian activist and jurist. He's a leading voice in the human rights and environmental justice movements. He is a judge and chair of the Assembly of Judges for the International Tribunal on the Rights of Nature, and a juror on the Permanent People's Tribunal. Now, let's delve into this captivating conversation. A warm welcome to Ashish and Francesco, and to our listeners, thank you all for joining us in another episode of this podcast.
Let me start this conversation by explaining the context in which this conversation takes place. Therefore, in the last few months, together with the judges of the Tribunal on the Rights of Nature, we decided to set up a judges' assembly as a collective space of change, dialogue, and action, such as fact-finding missions or issuing statements or organizing public events and discussions, such as this episode of the podcast series. Said this, let me start asking you how GTA has been formed, the process that led to this amazing convergence of experiences and processes of resistance that fully embody the concept and practice of pluriverse and are effectively offering concrete avenues to complement struggles for the rights of nature. The word to you, Ashish.
Thank you, Francesco. Wonderful to be on this podcast with you. So the idea of the GTA goes back many years actually to the feeling that many of us who've been part of trying to resist or deal with or talk about dialogue about the multiple crises that we face, many of which you mentioned, the ecological crises, the crises of inequality, of deprivation, of war and conflict, and so on. In India and elsewhere, many of us have been kind of trying to raise issues about these, to say no to destructive forms of development, to say no to authoritarianism, to patriarchy, and so on. But increasingly, many of us have also felt that along with saying no, we also need to be able to answer this question of what are you saying yes to? Are you basically just saying no to everything, which means no to any kind of human progress and development? Or are you saying that there are other ways of doing things? And that's a challenge that we have, we need to take upon ourselves, as what are the alternatives? Either processes that have actually been part of a local mainstream for a long time, such as sustainable farming and living with the forest and so on, or new ones that are emerging from within the belly of the beast, so to speak, within capitalist, statist, patriarchal societies. In India, we started a process in 2014 called the Vikalp Sangam, which means the confluence of alternatives, not conference, but a confluence, a meeting point of different kinds of initiatives and organizations working on alternatives, along, of course, also with resistance movements. Around that same time, even before that and subsequently, we were also in touch with a number of other similar alternatives movements in different parts of the world. For instance, I went for a couple of the international degrowth conferences in Europe. We were in touch with those who were bringing back ancient notions of buen vivir and sumak kause and senti pensar and so on from Latin America, Ubuntu in Southern Africa. And through these conversations, we increasingly felt the need to try and see what kind of linkages can be made. What can we do which can create more cross-learning, cross-geographic, cross-cultural learning spaces amongst these different alternative movements. And actually also around that same time, we were in touch with people such as Gustavo Esteva and Arturo Escobar, who were also initiating or already involved with similar networks like Vikalp Sangam in India. They had Crianza Mutua in Mexico, Crianzas Mutuas in Colombia, and of course others in other parts of the world. So that's how the idea started, 2016. And we built it up very slowly because we realized that you can't sort of create this kind of a global network from scratch overnight. So we contacted lots and lots of other networks and organizations. We started getting endorsements from multiple global or regional networks and organizations, indigenous peoples, feminist, youth networks, networks on the commons, solidarity economy, etc. And finally, then in 2019, we realized that we had some sort of a critical mass and a backing. So that's when we launched the Global Tapestry. What I think is very important, Francesco, is to emphasize that it's not an organization. It's not an umbrella trying to bring all others under its shadow in some sense. That's the kind of mistake that a lot of groups have made in the past, trying to become a single organization. And then you get into all these hierarchies and dynamics amongst people, and especially when it's cross-cultural, there can be a lot of misunderstanding. So we, right from the beginning, have deliberately said it's a platform, it's a process, it's something that anybody can run with as long as there's some broad agreement on principles and values. And yes, we have a number of sort of substructures in it, which are all also mostly informal. You mentioned weavers. So the first three weavers are Vikalp Sangam and the two Crianza Mutuas in Colombia and Mexico. We're now bringing in another network, hopefully from Southeast Asia, and we hope to keep expanding that so that we have these networks of networks, or networks of alternatives, which are able to do this kind of weaving of the tapestry together. So that's a bit on how it started.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Seems to me that these processes gain relevance if they are embedded in collective agency and the capacity of generating resistance and also implement what we called in the 90s concrete utopias. These experiences show in a way that they can solve one of these the traditional trilemma that social movements have been experiencing this far, notably whether theory comes before practice, or practice comes after theory, and where the organization or the structure comes before theory, before practice. And this is a trilemma that the modality of work of the GTA seems to have solved. Indeed, also more interestingly, social movements have established new practices that we find as prefigurative. The way they do things, the way they struggle is already a living example of the kind of society, or the kind that wants to be pursued, or most clearly, kind of words that are in the making. How do these three elements of theory, practice, and organization mingle together in the weavers, in the experiences and the actors actually connected to the GTA?
Yeah, I think, Francesco, one of the shortcomings of social movements in the last many decades, maybe many centuries, has been this kind of somewhat attempt to try and look at things in a linear way. You know, we criticize the linear direction which a lot of Western modernity talks about. So you're developing and developed and so on and so forth. Or you go from hunter-gatherer to agriculture to industry to digital, whatever. Now, just like we criticize that kind of linear thinking, which is really faulty, I think we also need to question ourselves in terms of this linearity of saying that first theory, then practice, then organization, or any other such structure that people posit. Because if we actually look at the movements on the ground, they don't do it like that. It's all built together, and it's sometimes a very sort of a messy kind of a juxtaposition of theory, practice, and organization or institution. And you're seeing that actually things are kind of learning from each other also in these processes. If something might start, for instance, as a reaction to a big extractivist project that's coming in. So it's a resistance movement, which is grounded, which is practical, but it's also based on a philosophy of saying, nature is not to be commodified, or our river is our mother, and we will not allow it to be shut by a big dam, right? So you get that grounded practice, you have the philosophy also in it, and the movement itself becomes the organization or the institution. So essentially GTA, first Vikalp Sangam, Kriyanza Mutwa itself, etc., and then coming together, GTA sort of learned from this to say that we're not going to insist on something coming first and something coming second. It has to all go hand in hand. If you look at the Zapatista movement, which you mentioned, or the Kurdish Rojava movement, or the movement for indigenous self-determination in so many parts of the world. In central India, for instance, a village gave a slogan 30 years back that we elect the government in New Delhi. In our village, we are the government. Nobody else will take decisions for us. We are the ones who will take it, and we'll do it with everybody involved by consensus, all the women, men, and often even the children. Now, that's both practice and very deep theory philosophy, right, of deep democracy, or what in India we call Swaraj. So in that sense, it's kind of going together. And this also then kind of relates to the idea of the pluriverse. We're not a universe. We're not something we're looking for universal solutions to the problems that we have. We believe that there's multiple practices, multiple theories, worldviews, concepts, cosmologies, etc., and multiple institutional structures and organizational structures, all of which could be valid insofar as they don't lead to the undermining of somebody else's practice and worldview and institution. This is very crucial, because sometimes people ask me, they say, okay, well, if pluriverse means all worlds fit into a world, then even capitalism will fit, even state domination will fit. And then that's how we say that no, because the fundamental values are values of solidarity, of love, of responsibility, of interconnectedness, etc. And so if my practice or theory or institution undermines your happiness and your well-being, that doesn't fit into this world. But there can be hundreds of thousands of ways in which, in fact, these goals of justice, multiple kinds of justice, can actually be met without undermining each other. So what we actually believe is that the most important is actually what's happening on the ground. You know, as I said, the grounded theory, practice, and institutions put together. So that grassroots experience in a city or in a village or wherever, in an indigenous people or a pastoral people or a industrial society, whatever, that grounded practice and theory and institution becomes the most important thing for us to root ourselves in and base the larger processes of GTA or any other such processes. Then you can actually build into that also that have come from great people. So whether it's a Marxist theory or feminist theory or Gandhian theory or any of these sorts of things kind of also built into it. And many movements anyway inculcate these in their own, either explicitly or implicitly. And again, very important, it's very important that we don't build the walls. You know, like academics do that. Oh, you're a Marxist, I'm a feminist, you're a this, I'm a that. But in these movements, that doesn't happen. And in GTA, we want to be very careful to avoid that. So for instance, many of us work, I mean, you people are doing fantastic work on the rights of nature. We're also in it in some way or the other. Now, there could be a very hardcore social science person who says that no, rights of nature is it's a regressive kind of a thing. Human rights is where we have to go. And what I think is very important for a process like GTA is to be able to bring these together in the form of a dialogue. Is there really a clash between them, or can we actually work on these together, where the rights of all people and all other species can actually come together? And where the agreement then comes is, what are our common challenges? Now, you mentioned, I think, from our note that we say right at the beginning that we're looking not for superficial answers. We're not saying, okay, there's a lot of waste, let's do recycling. Or there's carbon being produced somewhere, let's do carbon capture somewhere else and have net zero. That's the kind of greenwashing that's taking place in a big way all across the world these days. What we're saying is that, no, if there is carbon being emitted, if there is waste being produced, there are fundamental structures of the market, of the capitalist market or of the state. If there is injustice of some kind, there's fundamental structures of casteism or racism or patriarchy. And those are the ones that need to be tackled, even as we might work on reforms, because you can't change fundamental things overnight. So you work on reforms, but they need to work towards these very fundamental systemic structural changes. And that's also is something that kind of brings together these very different, this pluriverse of organizations, institutions, and processes and practices and theories together. One last thing I think that's very important is that we have this constant discussion of principles and values and ethics. Something that I often get asked is, okay, how do you replicate a Zapatista somewhere else, or a Kurdish Rojava movement somewhere else, or this central Indian village saying we are the government in our village? How do you replicate it? Or how do you upscale it? That's the conventional way of looking at it. Make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and so that it becomes macro. And my response has always been, and this is something that a lot of the GTA people also kind of agree to, that we're talking about outscaling, which means learning from each other, learning the principles that the Zapatista are applying, learning the processes that the Kurdish women are applying. How do they overcome patriarchy, for instance? What processes, what hurdles, what opportunities, etc., that they use? And from those learnings and lessons, and the fundamental principles that were applied, the principle of working collectively, the principle of working on solidarity, the principle of working with the commons and not with the private, the principle of respecting each other and the rest of nature. If those principles can then be brought back to where I am or you are, and applied, modified and applied in our own context, and then we network to create the scale. So that's the outscaling which creates the kind of macro scale rather than replication and upscaling. So anyway, these are some of the ways in which we're trying to put theory, practice, and organization institution together.
That is a basis for the recognition of the varied potential processes, the pluriverse itself. And also you mentioned another issue that is also at the center and the core of our discussion in the Judges Assembly, the relationship between human rights and nature rights, between the rights and the rights of nature. That is an ongoing debate that we are going to also undertake in our work in the Assembly. 2022 is not only the anniversary, the 50 years from the Stockholm Conference, that was also marked, that we also somehow celebrated with a webinar last week on the relationship between the need to live in harmony with nature and the Sustainable Development Goal, but also the 30 years from the Rio Conference, development and the environment. And so this year is a year when the scientific panel on the Anthropocene will decide which is a date of origin of this new phase, the so-called scene. And this is not only a technical and scientific topic, but also political, because it will determine who is responsible for current systemic crisis, whether it is humanity as a whole, whether this is a current model of development and market capitalism, whether there is also a very strong colonial element, patriarchal element. Indeed, what the GT experience and the experiences that are somehow working in the GTA show is that not all humanity is co-responsible of the systemic crisis. And actually, that there is a group, there's an important part of humanity that has been struggling against the drivers of this crisis, that is trying to implement sound alternatives. And also that the capitalism, the theory of capitalocene, does not conquer everything. There are spaces of resistance, spaces of alternative, spaces of friction, where these new worlds are being made. And I think this is somehow the spaces where communities are trying to mend this fracture, the fracture of modernity, the fracture between culture and nature, between humans and the rest of the living. And I think this is where the issue of the rights of nature comes into play. And you also mentioned very well in the chapter you wrote, Pluriverse. You are one of the co-authors, together also with other personalities, including another judge of the tribunal, Alberto Acosta. And you talk about the principles of radical ecological democracy. And you say that radical ecological democracy is ecologism and resilience, whereas humans are part of nature, and the rest of nature is an intrinsic right to thrive. So how do you see the theoretical connection between the knowledge generated within the GTA and expanding debate on rights of nature? What are the practical implications and synergies among these two different processes?
Francesco, I think before I get into that, a slight context to the radical ecological democracy and some of the work that we've been doing in different parts of the world. So the way we look at it is that there are, we call it the flower of transformation. So there are 5 petals of transformation that are taking place, and of course, much more needs to take place. There's the political, the economic, the social, the cultural, and the ecological. It's a bit artificial, but it's a way of trying to understand what's happening. And of course, all of these 5 petals are interconnected. They're not separate. And all of them are equally important. And at the core of this 5 petals, which I'll describe in a minute, is a set of values and principles, which I mentioned earlier, and I'll come back to maybe at the end just now. So if you look at political transformations, we're talking about the fact that, as the Central Indian village says, democracy is not about elections. It's about us taking power where we are. We are born with that power. It is inherent in us. Why do we give it to politicians and bureaucrats? We should be the decision makers in whatever collective we are in. But as we take decisions, we are also responsible to other people and to the rest of nature. We cannot be, it's not the American notion of autonomy and freedom where you can run your SUV wherever you want and bomb a country if it doesn't give you petrol at the right prices or whatever. So, but it is that, and that's how Gandhi put it very, when he talked about Swaraj, self-rule. He said, self-rule is autonomy, freedom, individual and collective, but with responsibility towards other people's autonomy, freedom, and well-being. And then we extended that to include other species. So that's the political. That has to go hand in hand with the economic transformation sphere, which is to say that people who actually put in all the hard work, the workers, the producers, the toilers, they are the ones who should be owning the means of production or in control of the economy. Why capitalists? Why the state? And through that, actually be able to also transform their lives in terms of much greater livelihood security. But that economic transformation is also about bringing caring and sharing back into the economy, not money, but that transactions, trade, exchanges, economic relationships need to be based on the notions of solidarity, care, share, the respect of production and reproduction, etc. The incredible invisible role that women play in the economy and much else. And so therefore notions of GDP or economic growth are completely nonsensical. We need to look at qualitative and quantitative indicators that really talk about what's meaningful in our lives. Do I have a good social relationship? Do I have a good family life? Do I have good learning opportunities? Do I have clean water? Do I have clean air, which is a huge crisis in India right now? 90% of Indians don't actually have clean air to breathe anymore. Do I have trees and flowers and birds outside who I can interact with, etc.? So this is really the kind of economic transformations. The third one is the social sphere, which is about creating much more equality and justice amongst genders, amongst sexes, amongst ethnicities, etc., against racism, against casteism. The fourth one, I think, which relates very much to the whole notion of the rights of nature, is the cultural dimension, the cultural and the language dimension, and knowledge. Because we have in the world such diversity of cultures and knowledges and languages. In India alone, we have 800 living languages. Each of those languages is a library of knowledge, right? Now, when we have processes which teach only in 5 or 10 or 20 state languages, we're actually erasing enormous libraries. We have knowledge practices which relate very closely to the soil, the seeds, the forest, the fish in the oceans, etc. And as we teach only modern science and technology, that also very badly, we erase those forms of knowledge. So the diversity and all of these being in the commons, this is also so crucial for the rights of nature movement, right? That nature, the rest of nature, and our knowledge relating to it has to be in the commons. It cannot be privatized. Intellectual property rights is a fundamental antithesis to any form of justice. And finally, then, of course, the ecological sphere, which is kind of the core, where the core of, say, rights of nature exists. Now, to me, I think what's vital is that if we put all of these together, kind of mesh them together in some way, look at them in an interconnected, intersectional way, as you mentioned, intersectionality. The rights of nature obviously is a very crucial part of this movement towards justice and regaining our peace with the earth. And especially in cultures or societies that have lost the connection, where there's a huge ecological rift between humans and the rest of nature. And so therefore, for instance, arguing for the legal rights of nature becomes one way of trying to begin to heal that rift. But as you all recognize, and as something that comes out of our struggles also, eventually we need to move even beyond the notion of the rights of nature, especially the legal rights of nature, to how do we bring back respect to all of nature, including ourselves, but also the rest of nature, fundamentally, so that we're actually living nature itself, right? Like, for instance, many the communities in New Zealand who argued for the rights of Wanganui River said, "We are the river is us." Now, that's a notion that for a lot of us becomes very difficult to even conceive of, right? The forest is me and I'm the forest, or the forest is us and we are the forest. But that is exactly what needs to be actually brought back into our lives, however challenging it might be. And this is where obviously indigenous peoples and other local communities become crucial, because many of them still do live, like you said, they're still living the non-capitalist life, and now asserting that they actually want to continue. Many of them want to continue living that non-capitalist and non-status life. So this notion of oneness with the rest of nature links to also the notion of oneness with each other as human beings, and the notion of oneness within oneself, the spiritual being, right? So how do I even look within myself and try and understand what is that unity within me, but also what is that pluriversity within me and in the outside world? And I think it's this very difficult but very essential intersectionality between different forms of justice, different ways of seeing, ontologies, epistemologies, different ways of being, different ways of doing, different ways of dreaming. I was for 5 days, I was in with the Sapara Nation in Peru, in Ecuador, and in the Amazon, and they were telling us how they live their lives by also interpreting their dreams. And so, different cultures do it in all kinds of different ways. So building bridges amongst them, talking to each other, not making them homogenous, but kind of understanding, maybe learning from, and continuing to evolve our own cultures and ways of doing things and being and dreaming and thinking and knowing. That, I think, is probably our most challenging but most essential task if we really want to deal with the kind of multiple crises that we're in. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Okay, I think you really, your explanations have really given us a very insight in what can be, pursued also beyond the specific realm of rights of nature. Now we can create connections and build up a broader set of common activities, and also step up, these global movements for systemic change. And I hope that, this conversation will be the very beginning of a fruitful exchange between the tribunal itself and the GTA. So we look forward to our next steps together. And I think we can get our conversation to a close, but this is just a temporary close. Anybody that is interested to know more about the GTA, they can access the website Global Tapestry of Alternatives, and you can look at the activities of the different weavers and partners, and also learn more about the principles and the activities that Ashish has been so eloquently shared. So we now close this episode of the podcast and look forward to the next episodes, and thank all of you for the attention, and to Ashish for his precious contribution.
Thank you, Francesco. Definitely look forward to much more of these dialogues.
As we conclude this enlightening episode of Conversations with Mother Nature, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to our guests, Ashish and Francesco. Thank you for sharing your invaluable insights and perspectives. Now, let us continue to nurture this spirit of collaboration and collective action as we strive towards a more just world for all beings. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you join us next time.